I think we can even influence the EU. Maybe Trump will use negotiation as leverage, saying you should buy more American oil and gas, or you should move away from Russia, pivot to us. We will give you a better deal. It's much more cleaner, more efficient. You want to have these deals. So he could leverage our energy supply as a negotiating tactic and say that this is the best way if you guys want to have a great relationship with us.
Hello. Welcome again to another episode in the Let People Prosper show. My name is Dr. Vance Ginn. I hope you're having a prosperous day. Well, today I'm delighted to bring on another guest who knows a lot about the energy markets and free markets, and she's always interested in pushing the envelope to make sure that we have the best energy and environment possible with full of abundance. And it's none other than Gabriella Hoffman. Gabby, welcome to the Let People Prosper show.
Vance, I'm so excited to be here. I love what the show name implies. I'm all for prosperity, and we'll talk more about why. But it's great to talk to you. There's so much happening in energy, and no better format than this to discuss.
Yes, I'm excited about it too. But let's go ahead before we get too far. Let me read your bio for the audience, and then we'll jump right into it. I'm excited to bring on today Gabriella Hoffman, who just mentioned that, someone who is bringing sanity, clarity, and a deep respect for liberty back to energy and conservation policy. She's the director of the Center for Energy and Conservation at Independent Women's Forum and one of the leading voices pushing back against the radical environmental agenda with facts, freedom, and common sense. Gabriella is not just a policy expert, she's also a media strategist, award-winning outdoor writer, and host of District of Conservation, where she tackles everything from public land policy to Second Amendment rights to the future of American energy. She's been featured in Fox News, The Hill, Real Clear, Field and Stream, Town Hall, and many more, and her roots run deep in the cause for liberty, thanks to the example of her Lithuanian parents who fled the Soviet Union, which I'm sure we'll talk about that as well. Gabby has her boots on the ground and her eyes on the truth, and I'm thrilled to dig into how we protect both freedom and the environment without government overreach. So, with all that fun stuff, Gabby, going on, let me go ahead and ask you the first question I do all the guests. Why do you do what you do every day?
I think it goes back to a personal connection. I think before I started to gravitate to this policy area, and I come about it from an unorthodox way, and I don't know if I should be admitting this, but I don't have a master's, I don't have a PhD. I'm unusual for a center director, but I credit it with being very thorough and attentive to these issues as a journalist, media strategist. So I feel like you can bring the same talents that a lot of theorists and people who pursue their MA and PhDs do, and try to have some real world connection to it. So I came about it actually first from the hunting and fishing and sporting world of things, and then had found overlap with energy because I met a lot of people in my outdoor adventures who worked in the energy policy or worked in energy sector. And I got to learn more about their kind of way of life and things of that sort. And I have family members who've worked in industries that have a lot of energy tie-ins. My father's in general construction. And so there was no day or no time I would hear about crazy green building policies or see certain restrictions and overregulation kind of hamper his business or that of other people working in his industry. And then as I got older and more full-fledged in energy policy, I started to want to have an interest in it. Seeing, things from the recreation fishing side being restricted because environmentalists saw that it was decimating biodiversity, but there was no such proof of that. And then they restricted your access in the bonus portion of it. And then as I start to get older and make money and, get different things, progress as you get older, and you see how intertwined everyday life is, especially first world living, to energy. Everything that we do revolves around energy. From the cars we drive to air conditioning to all these different derivatives. So much surrounds us. And when you kind of factor those in together and you see that connection, I think that's kind of what leads to different, your aha moment and I guess feeling that you can confidently weigh in on these issues. So in college, I went to UC San Diego. My final year in UC San Diego in 2012, we had the Clinton Global Initiative. My university, like every major university, had kind of this overabundance of climate alarmism, energy subtraction, this emphasis on carbon emissions. And we'll talk more about is that really, sound and soluble energy policy? And I don't think that really is when you have that emphasis. So that I felt was really drummed down people's throats. And that's what turned me off initially to energy policy. But as I got older, as I started to do my fellowship and investigative reporting in energy issues and where there was overlap, I started to say and feel that I could confidently weigh in on these issues dig into kind of the truth about the policymakers. Was it really done on the auspices of truth, empirical data, or was it more so emotionalism? Have all these environmental predictions panned out? Most of the times they haven't. And so you need a realistic policy agenda relating to energy and the different derivative sectors that are impacted by it. And I think the American people have realized this too. More and more Americans have said that, and we'll talk about, can you have a deregulatory agenda that leads to a maintenance of environment? Absolutely. And I think Gallup just recently showed that when they were polling people of the Trump administration, their views on it, they have started to agree with the notion that you can deregulate while still maintaining clean air, clean water. And we hadn't seen that before. So something is happening. So I had seen this early on. I'm glad more Americans are starting to gravitate towards this, but I think I have a unique view because I enjoy nature. I sympathize with people. I want industry to flourish. And I think those two areas don't have to be at odds with one another. So someone of my unique background, again, having kind of this unorthodox foray into policy, energy policy in particular, I think that could help make the issues a lot easier, more understandable, because they purposely make it, a lot of elected officials or regulators make it purposely convoluted, and that shouldn't be the case.
Yeah. Great points there. And with your background kind of writing about the outdoors, what were you writing about? What were some of the things you would write about the outdoors?
So much, actually.
Yeah?
And these issues are actually percolating. So I'm not sure how familiar your listeners are with Yellowstone or Greater Yellowstone ecosystem grizzly bears, or grizzly bears, the human apex predator conflicts. My award you were alluding to was actually about original reporting, talking to stakeholders there about why there has to be reforms to the Endangered Species Act that could not only benefit the human populations, but also even the animals in question, the grizzly bears, wolves themselves, especially.
Wow.
And what a lot of people don't recognize is that grizzly bears, especially in the Greater Yellowstone ecosystem, which encompasses Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana, they're actually flourishing. They've reached their carrying capacity, and the federal rules have to recognize and kind of be reflective of the science. And a lot of people claiming to be for the science don't like to follow the science when it's readily available to them.
Right.
So that was something, fishing closures for access in California. That's actually what animated me politically in Southern California, because there was an economic tie-in where these, different regulations on fishing access would actually have a hamper and a detriment to tackle businesses, to fishing charters, to so much. And that's actually why you see amongst the recreational fishing industry, for the most part, they tend to like free markets and support, political movements that welcome that, because under overregulation or radical environmentalism, those people aren't really welcomed, even though they're contributing so much to conservation, so much to the economy. Even something as simple as banning fishing tackle because they view lead to be detrimental to the environment. But the studies have been very mixed, or actually very positively receiving of lead in small increments, that it's not going to despoil the environment. So I was looking for things like that, and that kind of strengthened my free market environmental views as well. Or like where the government fails, you can have private solutions come and fix these problems instead of cutting access or trying to regulate something out of existence, which has no bearing to the environment positively.
Yeah. No, that's awesome. And I guess you got to tour that area whenever you would go and see everything. Have you been there yourself?
Several times. Yeah, I did a lot of reporting. I've even seen This is a great area actually to go if you have an adventurous curiosity spirit. There's a place called Tom Minor Basin. It's a public strip against private land or private ranches. And at sunset, this is the northern entrance of Yellowstone National Park. It's open to the public, no problem. You bring binoculars or your long focal lens, and you could see grizzly bears in the wild from a very comfortable distance, at least 1,000 yards. That was my most recent trip in 2021. But I vacationed there as a teenager with my parents living in California. It was just very accessible to us. I camped in Yellowstone once, and I've been to that region, I think 3 or 4 times now. I don't go nearly enough, sadly.
Sure.
But I have fond memories going there, family bonding, and it's a great place to go to. I recommend it for sure.
I love it. And I'm sure many of the folks who are listening, they like being outdoors. I know I do. My boys, I've got 3 kids, and 2 of my older boys, 7 and 10-year-olds, they love fishing. And so we go fishing all the time.
Love it.
And all that. And so I want to get into some of that in a minute. But one of the things I was thinking about before we get too far is, so the Independent Women's Forum, what all is that for the audience? What's a quick view of what's going on there?
Yeah, IWF seems to be, it's been around for 30 years. It's almost as old as I am. I think it was created in the latter half of 1991. I was born in spring 1991, so almost as old as me.
Yeah.
And we've become kind of this emerging women-led public policy outfit. And we're not only trying to appeal to women kind of in the middle, center left, or get, swingy, moderate women. Of course, we have a lot of conservative viewpoints. I mean, I'm very socially and fiscally conservative, full spectrum conservative. Most of my colleagues tend to lean that way too, but we've developed partnerships over the years with people who may not agree with us politically if they're in support of free market economics, if they're in support of free market environmentalism or gender issues or the things of that sort. So we know how to build alliances, kind of what we do see in the wider conservative movement. We still believe in that, the three-legged stool principle and trying to forge good coalitions and alliances. And we have definitely been front and center on a lot of the different things, especially as it relates to women's spaces. But we are trying to make a name for ourselves in other areas. My colleague, Patrice Onwuka, who you should have on the show if you haven't already spoken to her, she's been leading the fight to help protect freelancers and independent contractors. She just spoke before the Senate about portable benefits. It's a great hearing. She gave it and delivered a fantastic testimony. So Patrice has kind of shaped her center to be a leading voice for independent contractors and freelancers who are often ignored by regulators. Not so much under this administration we have now, but previously very much so. And this, pivot, you see this, and we've talked about this, I think, in a group setting, where there's a pivot to unions on not only the left, but sometimes even the right. And so we have tried to kind of act as a bulwark and say, okay, we can have everyone exist harmoniously. But I think, but this growing sector of the private workforce, independent contractors, freelancers, a lot of women, 50% close to, I think the stats
is that what it is now?
It's close to 50%. Yeah, if not already. Wow. So we're trying to showcase that, with our with our proximity, of course, all of us are women. So our proximity to these issues, we can kind of offer a gentler, more nurturing viewpoint of conservatism without, doing anything. No, I would say cringe, lessening of the views or watering down of our views. But we feel that in our capacity, we can speak to slightly different demographics while still maintaining our principles through that. So IWF has effectively done this for 30 years, but more, I would say, especially effectively in the last 5 to 10 years. So we've kind of emerged as a leader, and we love working with different free market outfits to champion the cause.
Love it. I love it. And you always do great work. And I'm glad to have more people on from IWF and everything else. And, I think we need more of that, right? We need more people out there speaking about these things from a conservative side and free market angle, because too often you kind of hinted at it, but we have some people on the right who are wanting to go at it from a big government angle nowadays. And it's unfortunate. And so I'm really glad that you and others there are working on this in this space. One other thing before we start getting into a lot of the policy stuff is I'd love to hear some of your thoughts about Lithuania and like when you came to America and all that stuff. Like I love hearing those types of stories as well. So what would you like to share?
Yeah, slight correction. I was actually born to Lithuanian immigrant parents. So I was born in the United States. Slight correction. Want to make sure for accuracy. But it's sometimes confusing. You think first generation, first person to arrive or first person to have been born, but it's the latter. So I wanted to just quickly correct there. But
okay, thank you.
But no. It's very interesting to have been kind of born into that situation where you are a child of immigrants, you've seen your parents build up their businesses or work up different careers, and it really does shape my viewpoints. I would say that my heritage largely explains why I orient myself to free market economics, limited government worldview, because I saw and heard, I've only visited Lithuania twice. I went last year, and speaking of free markets, that place is just burgeoning with a lot of opportunities. It's becoming a tech hub. They sometimes act as a bulwark, thankfully, with much of Central and Eastern Europe against overregulation from the EU. We're starting to see a little bit of tension with the countries within the EU, even. And Lithuania likes to kind of stick out and say, like, well, we remember our past and we don't want to have these policies because they could be a hearkening back to that. So Lithuania, being a very little independent country, it was actually the first of the 15 republics occupied by the USSR to break away. So they have a very reluctance to, they have an independent streak. They're very reluctant for any central planning policies. They've had a very independent streak from the get-go, and throughout its history, it was part of way back, the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, which I think after the United States was one of the first constitutions of like reputable acclaim where it respected individual rights. You had to, not unfortunate, but in that time, their constitution said that you had to reach a consensus before the king or the ruler had to, put a decree.
Right.
So very, very early outset of that. In Poland, its neighbor kind of a little bit over the ways is going to be the new economic center of Europe very soon in terms of its power and position. Although maybe under Germany, their new president who worked in finance perhaps will probably bring that country back. We'll see. But Eastern Europe's time, I think, is now, and it's rising. And just to, like, I saw that through my own family, the entrepreneurial spirit, the love of freedom. Those who kind of those who immigrate here tend to lean more center, right? You do have some little deviation. But for the most part, I would say, like, if you're first generation or maybe second generation or fresh off the boat, you came directly zero generation, you've always seen among the Baltics, they tend to lean conservative. They tend to lean libertarian, pro-free markets, just because they remember central planning, collectivism just didn't work, and they were deprived of so many opportunities, which is why in the modern day, it ranks even higher than the US on, let's say, Heritage's economic freedom index. I think they're number 16, we're number 25, 26. So they have a leg up, and Estonia even more. Estonia has always been very fascinating. But these little countries that don't really get much attention or kind of are underappreciated are kind of schooling us in some areas. Not entirely perfect, but they're showcasing to America that we wanted to have what America has. We're trying to emulate what America does. We may be hamstrung by the EU, but we can still showcase that we love freedom. We are orienting ourselves there. Although in some of their tax schemes, they do pay a lot more in income tax than we do. So there are drawbacks, of course, to their system as well. But I would say for the most part, in terms of like cultural similarities, in terms of shared freedoms, everyone always says, well, we have to look, to Western Europe for commonality. But actually, you find more of that with Poland, the Baltics, Czech Republic. Those countries actually tend to have more alignment with us. And I've written about this actually at Real Clear World, why our country should work with these little countries, because they are paying their NATO quotient. They are very much, for border security. They want economic freedom. They're very reasonable. And they want to have their own energy independence, which I love about them. I'm so glad they've weaned themselves off of Russian electricity and energy, which is very hard to do because the EU is so interdependent. And then with them having to force, it's ironic. I mean, they've even called out Ursula von der Leyen in Brussels for not speeding up the decoupling quicker because and what they also have to, point out, and I think this is something that I've written, and I hope Europeans who are watching recognize this. It's not just Americans like me lecturing, but their whole push to net zero is why they're so reliant on Russia for oil and gas today, because those energy sources are not reliable, and you're going to the source that you've constantly relied on, and you're funding both sides of the Russian-Ukrainian war. So how can you claim you're for Ukraine and then simultaneously do that with your energy markets, be wholly dependent on Russia? But they seem to be slowly drifting away. But the Baltics have had leadership here and really pressured the rest of the EU to fall in line. So I'm encouraged by that. Lithuania is a great country. I hope people visit. Bring your tourism dollars. You won't be chastised there. They love Americans. There's even an American pub and restaurant bar in Vilnius. So they do like Americans. And with the recent tragedy there was in the army base in Lithuania, they had shown the most utmost respect, for 4 soldiers who were killed in action in that horrible exercise gone awry. So they love America. They don't have this hatred that we're starting to see, with Paris or some other Western European countries where they're chastising and harassing European tourists. Yeah. You won't find that in Central and Eastern Europe. So go to the Baltics. They're great.
Okay. Yeah, that's awesome. Well, I need to go. You excited me. I'm ready to go now. And it is exciting, though, Gabby, to look at what's going on across many countries. I mean, including, of course, Argentina with Javier Milei and all the great things that he's doing there. You've just got a lot more of the libertarian, classical liberal sort of mindset that's going on in the public policy, which is really a great direction to go. I'm thinking about different ways to get into our energy discussion, but maybe what if we start with what's happening in Europe? Because to your point, it's a warning for us. It's a cautionary tale for us if we continue to head down this way. But what have we seen in Europe on the energy front? And then we can get back some into the U.S.
Europe is about 5 to 10 years ahead of us on energy policy, or any policy for that matter, maybe 10 to 15 if we're being generous. Yeah. And had we not had a shift in administration, we would have seen the U.S. trajectory on energy policy follow that line, follow the EU line. We would have been committed to so-called decarbonization goals still. And Europe is finding it out hard that with the recent Spanish Peninsula or Iberian Peninsula energy collapse, there was an outage in the Czech Republic. I think that was due to mechanical errors, not so much the grid being overstacked with unreliable solar and wind. But we've seen Europe have to get bailed out, whether it's, through financial bailouts or turning on the spigots of Russian oil and gas, or positively, I think where we could see them kind of changing a little bit is now with the Trump administration in office, they want to buy our LNG and they want to buy even our nuclear technology for SMRs, which I'm very encouraged by. But they're still insistent on this net zero climate goals. And what that has been doing to them, I think you've heard this refrain, the United States innovates, China copyrights, the EU doesn't innovate, regulates, yes.
Yeah, he regulates.
And they're doing this with energy. And I think more broadly, even to what kind of encompasses this is their insistence to keep environmental, social, and governance regulations.
Yeah.
I think there are 4 of them in the books. And so they're actually going to be discouraging free trade with us because they have these crazy rules in place. So I've seen and observed that different corporations have said we might have to reassess our ties with the EU. There's actually no formal trade agreement between the US and the EU. Their website listed, which is funny. We do have some other sort of framework of trading with them, but with respect to energy markets, yes, we do sell them LNG. We are selling them SMR technology or entering into partnerships to do that, especially in Lithuania and Poland. But with ESG, I think 80% of companies, US-based corporations that do business in Europe have said that unless you reassess these 4 ESG investment type laws, we're going to have to take our business elsewhere because it's uncompetitive, it's burdensome, it's going to make us have a poor return on investment. We're not going to get anything out of this. And the Europeans who would stand to benefit from, let's say, energy exports or financial investments would lose ultimately too. It's not just the United States, them trying to play chicken with us, but it's ultimately the Europeans who want to see lower prices and costs are going to suffer ultimately as well. So we hope to see, and I hope to see Brussels reassess their climate provisions. They've said, well, we're going to delay our decarbonization goals by maybe 10 years, or maybe we're going to speed it up by 10 years, but they're not listening to their individual constituents in different countries. And they're not even seeing, that it's again, going back to that point I made earlier, it's going to lead to a greater reliance on adversary nations who don't have good environmental standards and who are perpetrating war in a place like Ukraine and, kind of playing around and interfering with other republics, Romania, Moldova, and other places that do want to have a taste of freedom and free markets as well. But the EU has this problem of overregulating, and especially in energy, they have this tendency to do so. And had we not steered off that course, we could have been on that same trajectory. But I'm hoping the posture that we are seeing, this energy abundant posture, us entering more deals. I think even Norway signed a deal with us. I saw Secretary Wright had entered an agreement, I think, for hydropower to increase trade and, better dealing in terms of that space. Because hydropower is actually a renewable resource that people don't often talk about. But to see that kind of sharing of knowledge and that agreement come together, even with Norway more recently, was very encouraging to see. But I think we, as the global superpower, we still are. I think we can even influence the EU. Maybe Trump will use negotiation as leverage, saying you should buy more American oil and gas, or you should move away from Russia, pivot to us. We will give you a better deal. It's much more cleaner, more efficient. You want to have these deals. So he could leverage our energy supply as a negotiating tactic and say that this is the best way. If you guys want to have a great relationship with us, I don't know how they can do it on the regulatory side, but maybe he could say, well, if you don't remove this regulation, we may reconsider some of the deals we're formulating with you. So I think we could be in a top negotiating stance to say, follow our policy posture on energy, and you guys will be handsomely rewarded. Your citizens will see cheaper prices, and you don't have to fall back on this regulatory slog that you guys have encumbered yourself with for decades. And I think I've interviewed the Lithuanian opposition leader who said that we have been overregulated. If he comes to power, if their party comes to power in a few years, you can see him and some others. I think even Germany's new president, Chancellor Merz, has said that we have to gravitate away from this over-regulatory scheme. So I think you might even see, like I said, major Western powers start to reconsider net zero. So we can pressure them. Hopefully they can take the posture that we have and influence Brussels in that manner.
Yeah, no, that's great background, because one of the things that I hear, and I've talked about on the show too, is, Germany went from this powerful economy and really moving along with energy and everything in abundance. But then when all these net zero and regulations started to come in, I mean, from what I understand, they were using wood to heat their homes in many cases. not to mention the particulate matter and everything else that comes in with that, and the how bad it is for you for that smoke, because they want to move more in this direction of, because they don't want to have climate change, and humans are causing it, the anthropogenic climate change and everything else that's going on. And, it kind of what you were saying earlier about the science is, it seems like many folks, especially on the left, want to say that the science is already done. We already know what's going on. And you start looking at the facts and everything else, and it's like, well, these things don't quite match. So something must not be right here. And part of the science, the scientific method is that we continue to test our hypotheses. And when our hypotheses test, we should reframe our way of thinking. But unfortunately, they just don't seem willing to do that. Or maybe it's the people in power. I'm not quite sure. But are you kind of hopeful that maybe they're seeing a different direction for the future?
I think so. I think we are starting to see a shift, not only in the public sector, but the private sector, which was all in on this net zero stuff. I went to a Google energy lunch policy meeting when they were talking about technologies they're going to use and deploy going forward. I did not hear solar and wind. I heard geothermal, advanced nuclear, and natural gas. They caveated natural gas with carbon capture technology, but that's not ready for prime time yet. And that actually can undermine natural gas in the outset too. If you think about it, because you're storing carbon under the ground. So you're taking steps to claim that you're clean, but it's maybe questionable if it's clean whatsoever. And so you see tech companies, you see the posture of the federal government, because people were, and I think we're going to see this regulation wise with the revisiting and perhaps deregulating of the endangerment finding from 2009, which is what really captures every energy policy to be dictated by carbon or carbon emissions reductions. I've heard that that's coming in the next few weeks, maybe next few months from the EPA, from sources I talked to. But that's to be expected to see that rule go away, because that is what is really hamstringing policy, to have everything tied back to, is it going to reduce carbon emissions? Is it soluble in this way, that? So because energy has been so tied to carbon, which is only 0.04% of the atmosphere, people recognize that, okay, we are reducing our emissions as we advance and progress and innovate. Are we really seeing a worser quality of life with the increase of oil, gas, nuclear? No, because we don't have energy poor countries. We have energy rich countries.
Yes, exactly. No, that's a great point. And two, I mean, we want to be prosperous. And whenever I talk about prosperity, I usually talk about it's more than just material things. But of course, material things is a big part of that allows us to be prosper in other areas and thrive as families and individuals and everything else. And there's a lot of concern, of course, of what's happening in Europe. And I mean, if you consider all of Europe, it's a large economy. I mean, I think it's second compared to the United States. And so it's right up there. They're having a lot of influence on the global economy. And so they need to get this right too. And it's not just the countries that are hurting from this. It's the people, right? And I always try to bring this back to people prospering, talk about people, because if we don't, then it becomes like some macro thing, or we're trying to control things. And unfortunately, that's where it's become, is that the leaders think they have all the knowledge in order to direct resources where it should go, but they don't. They fail from the knowledge problem, like Hayek talked about, and others have over time. And I'm hopeful, coming back to the United States now, we had the Biden years where things were not necessarily going in a good direction in this space. ESG was taking over a lot of the private businesses, a lot of the investment funds. If you didn't have ESG, you weren't going to get funding. Even the Federal Reserve has regulations. The CFPB has had things that have dealt with ESG. And I think Russ Vought, who's my former boss, who's now heading up, the CFPB, has been putting back and scaling back some things. But I'm hopeful now with the Trump administration, to your point earlier, through deregulation, and this was a big part of Trump 45, which I was a part of for a while at OMB, to really deregulate and unleash energy throughout the economy. I want you to talk about that. And also, I wanted to get your thoughts on, there's this all of the above approach that says, let's just do everything. And then there's some that say, well, let's pick this one or that one. But kind of what are your views about what's happening now in America and maybe where we're heading as far as the all the above strategy goes?
There's this talk of abundance that I think a lot of us are privy to in the free market space, especially on the center right. We are starting to see the left kind of tackle their version of it, but they've struggled a bit because they can't come around to agreeing with abundance, because then it goes against their anti-capitalist attitudes for many of them. But they're slowly making their way, and maybe we can nudge them in that respect. But the Trump administration has actually gone above that and actually made headway in abundance, or restoring abundance, because we've always had this abundance mindset in the country. It just wasn't largely defined. Now we do see it defined because we're maximizing energy production Doesn't mean it's going to be a project on every single acre of land or, sensitive stream or wildlife corridor, things of that sort. But because we had this notion of energy subtraction where the government picks winners and losers, the Biden administration, as you've probably talked about before on the show and everyone knows, he was very preferential to solar and wind, battery, and electric vehicles. They sound great. They are mature industries. They've been subsidized for decades, and they haven't really reflected the energy mix. You only have solar accounting for 3.9%, wind maybe 10.2% if you're lucky. So we were promised this mass adoption of solar, wind, and so-called renewables, but our grid hasn't met that. And actually, the reverse is occurring with this warning of potential rise in electricity demand, which is happening, it is occurring. Yeah. And you have aging grids that haven't been not renovated, but they haven't been retrofitted to accommodate more energy and electricity. I want to be specific there. And so you're seeing different grid operators and utility managers defaulting to natural gas, nuclear, and even coal. Coal has kind of been given a second life, not because the Trump administration is giving them preferential treatment. He's actually course correcting a lot of the regulations that were placed on coal and really unleashing it. I think a lot of the observers in energy have said, well, he's giving preferential treatment to them. No, he's actually reversing Obama-era policy. And even a federal judge had said that Obama's prohibition of coal leases on federal lands actually was illegal. He couldn't do that. And that was ruled last year, 8 years after being implemented. And so you see these reliable forms of energy being shored up or projects being announced to accommodate this. And people are very excited. They should be, because they see that their electricity bills are skyrocketing. And I want to put out there for listeners there who are, I think some people who our friends might travel with in the energy space. I talk a lot with fellow policymakers and others who are commenting on this. And there are some people in their circles who are blaming the rising electricity rates on Trump-era policies, even though the repeal of the IRA green subsidies will not take effect for a couple years. What we're seeing is a hangover from the Biden-era policies, where this insistence and push to net zero is now kind of reaching max capacity and crisis with different grid operators. And you talked about MISO, or you talk about PJM, all these different operators, every report they put out there. And there's also the North American Electricity Reliability Corporation, NERC. Yeah. They've all warned that as you start to onboard more solar, wind, and you age out or retire prematurely, especially coal and natural gas, you're going to have this friction in the grid. You're going to see energy that may have been accumulated loss. In California, they have so much solar power, they don't know where to store, and they just toss it and get rid of it. So it's not working in these states where they're experimenting with net zero or these renewable portfolio standards that states are deciding and implementing. And so to your question about like all of the above, I wrote an article with Andre Bellevue, who was previously with the Commonwealth Foundation. Now he's with Congressman Dan Crenshaw's office. But we were wanting to examine, maybe we need to reassess all of the above, because in our opinion, we feel that there's too much of an emphasis on these renewables. And again, going back to this carbon quotient with the endangerment finding from 2009, which again is going to be struck down, likely redone and revised. And so, looking for just carbon reducing sources is not going to be reliable or dependable for when you need it most. And so do we want to have this notion of energy subtraction? Can you have this high quality of life with energy sources that are not so abundant, or they don't work 24/7? They don't deliver when transmission lines are faulty, or there's a blackout or brownout. And so you can't consume less energy. And there's a paradox called Jevons paradox, where this philosopher was examining, transition to coal from wood burning. You were talking about wood burning earlier. He found that actually you're going to be consuming more energy, not less, as you transition and innovate. And so that's something you have to reconcile with. Does this mean that you can't have solar and wind in the grid? Maybe, but they haven't been fully tested in the market or brought to the market in a tangible way. They've had to be like barely survive. They have to survive with government help, and they can't flourish. Like a lot of the companies that we see that get government backing, they declare bankruptcy. How many cylinders are we going to see from the Biden era? And so if it was truly, at the behest of the free market, we would see more adoption of it. Like I said, you look at the government data, barely does it account for the grid. 78% of the electric mix today, and I think it's going to increase more, and even globally, 78% is coal, natural gas, and nuclear. Globally, renewables only account for 3%. 97% is still conventional and even nuclear. So is the transition happening? No. And that's why you have to be very careful about this language. Like I said, there could be some room for wind and solar, But the way that all of the above is kind of interpreted, it means that you could give an outsized influence to that and ignore reliability, affordability, and other criteria when deciding what energy to shore up. And I think the market is rewarding and welcoming LNG, especially nuclear. People want to see nuclear is more popular than ever today, even amongst women who are very reticent for nuclear. So,
yes. Bring it on.
Yeah.
I'm definitely ready for it. I think, what would you rather call it? Like, if it's not all of the above, because I agree with everything you're saying, and I've used the all of the above language for a long time now, because I'm thinking, in my mind, right, it's like all of the above is not picking winners and losers. Let's just let the market work, and whatever will come out will come out. And I think it'll mostly be reliable source of energy, like you mentioned before. But is there a better term maybe we should be thinking about?
I think abundance really encapsulates that. I think you can say that because in the definitions, let's say Utah has actually been one of the first to implement this abundance posturing, which says we will encourage the deployment and harnessing of reliable, affordable, scalable, safe energy sources. So I think abundance can actually encompass it rather than all of the, because all of the above is just too wordy.
Yeah.
So abundance, I think, can perfectly encapsulate it. And it's easier. It's just better rolls off the tongue.
Yeah. No. Okay. I love it. And you're going to have a report come out soon about abundance, right?
I will. Yes.
Okay.
Stay on the lookout for that. Yes.
All right. That sounds good. Definitely will be on the lookout for that. It's interesting because I live in Texas, near Austin, Texas, and we had the great freeze of 2021. And, a lot of people blame natural gas for that. And there was a lot of discussion. There were a lot of hearings here in Texas and everything else. And the way that I kind of see it, or the way that I guess what the facts have showed me from Rob Bradley and others out there, is that you had wind and solar that basically were kicked offline because whenever there's a freeze, a 100-year freeze in Texas, and the solar panels are iced over, they're not getting any sun. And by the way, the sun's not even shining because it was cloudy for 5 or 6 days in a row. And there wasn't any wind, and the wind turbines that were there froze over. And so they couldn't spin. And then that set off a lot of the natural gas plants to trigger and then also go offline. Some of them froze as well. And so you had a combination of all these bad actors and bad factors that were going in. And one of the things that I kept bringing up, and others did too, was that Texas had been subsidizing wind and solar for so long.
Yep.
And I think that it fell into this trap, to your point, Gabby, of we wanted all of the above strategy. We thought that this was going to allow for us to be more abundant and have more prosperity. And, Governor Rick Perry back in the day started a lot of that and was a big push to say we need more wind and solar. But now we saw pretty directly what some of those effects were. And some would say, well, it's because, Texas has this deregulated retail sector. It's more regulated at the generation part of it, even though we have ERCOT that's separate from the rest of the national grid. But to me, the problem was still the government was at fault. And instead, we started going towards more government solutions, which just builds on it if you don't solve the government problem to begin with. But I wanted to get your thoughts on maybe what you've heard about Texas or how other states might be preparing themselves for the increases in energy. Because to your point, it's another great one, is that energy uses and electricity usage is continuing to go up. Part of that's from data mining centers. Part of that's from a whole bunch of other things that are happening, and just we're becoming richer. And air conditioning, which I love. I'm in Texas. If we didn't have air conditioning, I don't know what I would do.
Same in Virginia.
That's why I go to Colorado, during the summer, try to cool down a little bit. But man, it just seems like there's so many factors, and a lot of the state legislators are trying to find quick solutions. But I wonder maybe what your cautionary tale is on some of that.
Yeah, I can offer some cautionary language there. And yes. I think Wyoming falls into the same bit in terms of a very deregulated environment where wind and solar, especially wind, has started to kind of pop up all over the place. And I saw turbines that weren't working, blades that were broken, and it's not a pretty landscape. And yes, red states are not immune, sadly, to this because they're promised through different, incentives that they offer that these are going to bring jobs, it's going to boost the economy. And if those projects, let's say, don't get the investments or government backing, as we know, is largely what it is. If they don't come to fruition, that's going to be the costs and the after effects are going to be saddled on the local communities, the counties, the individuals, and the price is going to go up. And ironically enough, Biden was seeking out different sites in Western red states for new renewable projects, primarily that to try to get people, as we saw with the debate of the IRA, with the One Big Beautiful Bill, no Republican had voted for the IRA green subsidies, but for some reason, some of them were clinging on to it, which makes no sense to me because they could be, backed financially by these different interests. Maybe they were promised that a certain project's going to come online and deliver all these great things. But as we see with the market conditions moving away from that, I don't see these projects coming online, or it could take years. And what's really funny is, how can you say you have this posture that you want more American energy, you want more energy dominance, especially with solar and wind derivatives largely being sourced by China? And you claim to be tough on China, and yet you're elevating the technology. This is not a conspiracy, but Reuters had reported that some weird, I think it was kill switches, were found in a lot of the solar panel technology. And China could use that for nefarious reasons, turn off the solar plants and invite a lot of insecurity and problems that way, national security-wise as well. And so red states have fallen into this trap too. It's not just a blue state problem because they were buying into this allure of clean energy, falling into all of the above. But smart governors, and I think even in Texas, they have started to move away from this. They had too much of an emphasis on wanting to shore up wind and solar, especially wind. And now they have said, I think in a few recent years, I remember writing about this for one of my reports last year, a smaller policy focus where Texas was trying to rectify the situation with pledging to endorse more and shore up more natural gas and nuclear. And I think Governor Abbott wants Texas to be a new advanced nuclear hub, which is great. And I think a lot of states are going to be competing and vying for that position. But yeah, they fall easily into this because the clean energy industry gets a lot of government backing. The deals sound great. They promise a lot of deliverables, but any casual observer can see that when something is readily subsidized for decades upon decades, maybe it's not what the public wants or what the markets are rewarding. They are increasingly, as I mentioned earlier, they're increasingly rewarding nuclear because they see nuclear works 93% of the time across the year. They see that it occupies 1 square mile versus 40 to 70 times more land that solar and wind occupy. And so people just see it's better for the environment in terms of, that, and also for dispatching electricity. You want something that works. You don't want something that promises or feels good or promises to push you into a net zero future, because we see that even if you were to put all your eggs in one basket and usher in a transition away from what we currently have in our energy mix to 100% renewables, it's extremely costly. I think one estimate globally and partially the United States, globally, they say it would cost $215 trillion to transition away, which nobody has that kind of money.
Right.
It's like unspeakable.
2 times the global GDP.
Yes. And then in the United States, Heritage had a great report that said that only 0.2 of a Celsius degree would be reduced. And then you'd have economic turmoil, I think $7 trillion to transition. And like I said, little benefit to the environment, even under the auspices of carbon reductions. So when people start to realize the math that goes into this, and then they also realize there's no retirement plans for when these projects don't work to their full capacity. Texas is very infamous, sadly, in this regard, where there's a graveyard of wind turbines, and there's no contingent plan for recycling that. So it's piling up. It's creating a problem. It's an eyesore. It's an expense to taxpayers. With GE Vernova, I think is who owns that Sweetwater graveyard. And so all these things that are promising, this transition, but also we're going to have a cleaner environment. You see the end of life cycle of these projects, it actually could be worse for the environment than coal, natural gas, and nuclear. That's my assumption of it.
Yeah. Not to mention the bird migrations.
Yes.
And the deaths of birds and everything else going through. It's, so
you
many
have to
good
weigh
points,
the trade-offs.
Gabby. Yeah, exactly. All right. So as we're wrapping up some here, I know that you've done some work with SPN's Generation Liberty and also Young Voices,
yes,
and others. And, given all your background and everything that you're working on and the IWF as well, what's giving you hope about the next generation of leaders? And where do you hope that the liberty movement goes within the energy space and the other things that you're working on today?
It's so wonderful to have these programs. And I did Young Voices right at the cusp of like my early 30s, and now I'm in my mid 30s. So I'm glad to have done that program. I did Generation Liberty Fellowship right at the cutoff when I turned 30. So I was grateful to get in and do that. And now being a mid-professional, doing the Club for Growth Foundation Fellowship, I can't speak to it enough. Like, we do most of our stuff, having graduated from the program, you meet virtually, but you have 2 in-person events. And it's so great to meet other professionals, some who've been longtime friends of mine, people I've been connected to. And I remember coming up in conservative politics where there was only very few offerings. I did the Young America's Foundation internship at the Reagan Ranch Center. There were a couple offerings, but there wasn't so much of different mentorship opportunities or programs to enhance you as a mid-level and high-level professional. And now there are. And so us millennials who are, going into these programs, graduating from these programs, you mentioned Young Voices, great program. I feel like I strengthened my writing, spending several years with them. I was a regional leader with them for a time. And that really is a great incubator for writers because the media ecosystem is so saturated. You may not know how to get in. And if you're looking to break through and have people edit your pieces, give you constructive feedback and get placed into very notable publications, Young Voices is a great outlet for you. So I can't speak highly of them enough. And SPN is great. If you meet it's I think like 18 to 30 is the cutoff. So it's a little younger. I think for Club for Growth, it's maybe into the 50s. I don't think there's a time limit, but I think you have to be like in your mid 20s, early 30s and beyond. And so it's a little more generous in terms of the age limit because they want to have professionals. But I think, programs like that give me hope because we have this tension right now in conservative politics. I think it's glaringly clear that you have a tension between kind of a more populist wing, MAGA, if you will, and even among MAGA from friends who deal more directly into that, there's even a fissure there because some of them want to be classically liberal. They want to follow free markets. Some of them want to be more populist. So you find like little divisions or fissures all across the spectrum. But I think traditional conservatism, including free markets, will win out. I just think people, they see the example of Milei in Argentina, as you alluded to earlier. Yeah. Such a fantastic miracle. Like, I want to go to Argentina partly because of him, but I've always wanted to go fishing there and to see Patagonia and see Buenos Aires and all that.
That'd be awesome.
Now I have an incentive more so to go because I know like going there I could feel safe and I want to put my dollars there.
Right.
And so people see examples like I alluded to earlier, the Baltics, free market embrace, like from going from occupied by communists to being a free market kind of refuge in the European Union. That whole region, the Baltics. So it's like it works and people crave it. And I think even amongst conservatives, even as we debate, is this has good merit? Is this inherently good? Is it at odds with social conservatism? Is free markets why I can't afford a home or this or that? Unfortunately, we are going to have to wrestle with this populist gesture or posture where they almost sound similar to the left, where they blame free markets for problems or like this insistence on individualism, this insistence on, putting markets over people. And everyone I talked to, I've talked to you, I've talked to many people. Nobody is putting markets above everything. They're putting it on an equal playing field because they see that free markets help kind of usher in individualism, quality of life, family, because all of it is interrelated. I don't think you have to sacrifice one versus the other, but we see a lot of people come in. Perhaps they're grievanced. Maybe they were formerly on the left and they haven't been properly yoked in free markets. And they can be. There's nothing, I would say, you're not ever late to come to free markets. But I think politics now is so instantaneous. Everything is, you lean on the whims of an influencer. And some people are very impressionable and they follow influencers who, ironically, are successful because of free markets, but they might rail against it. You find this on both the right and the left. So I think we do have some people who are, I would say, influencers who are champions of free markets, even indirectly, which is great. But you do, like I said, see this tension because partly of social media or just because of a changing media landscape. And I think these are long enduring qualities. Like someone like me wouldn't be where I am today without it, because if Soviet Union hadn't collapsed, I don't know what would have happened. And if America didn't, we're not sadly a purely free market society, it's more of a mixed economy. You know this better than anyone, studying economics full-fledged. But we could go towards that, hoping to get our spending under control, hopefully cutting taxes, deregulating, doing all of that. And I was reading Samuel Gregg's book. Actually, I have it right here. And he talked about how I bookmarked it on page 279, and he talked about relating it to wider America. I'm merely paraphrasing, but free enterprise, like to the wider American story. And I'm like, this is exactly what needs to be done. And people have done this and have tried to reach that goal. But the way that he articulated that in his book, which people should read if they haven't already, it was so articulate and very easy to understand. And I hope people who can wield influence in media, in the center right, or have some sort of play there in public policy. And I know we try to do this at IWF, but weaving it back to the greater American story is what makes it more tangible, accepted, and liked by people. But we just have people who kind of make it like ugly. Not ugly, but I don't think we have the best articulation of free markets. And this is a perennial problem. This happens all the time. But we have great people like you who know how to articulate a free market vision and make it nice and attractive. I try to do my best with the platforms I have. But I think it's just, and it's also like, who are the media elevating? Because if they elevated people like us and our friends and the people and associates we talk to, I think you could get more people to gravitate. But if you have influencers who are very choosy or who don't like it or are questioning it, even on the center right, that is why the attitudes toward it are negative, because they're not understanding what it is. Maybe they don't have a personal positive interaction with it, but plenty of us do. And if they talk to us, we can definitely dispel any misconceptions and offer a good remedy and a positive vision.
Yeah, definitely. Wise words, Gabby, as always. And where's the best place to find you and all your great work?
Twitter, X, whatever it is now. Gabby_Hoffman. My work at IWF. You just Google my name, Gabriella Hoffman. It'll come up with all the different derivatives, my podcast, my writings, my work, social media. I'm all over the place, Instagram, Facebook, X, YouTube. So find me there. Would love to connect with any of the listeners and share the good word of free markets.
Yeah, excellent. Well, I'll make sure to put this in the show notes page as well. And thank you, Gabby, for coming on the IPO Prosper Show. And God bless you and your family.
Thank you, Vance. It was a pleasure.
Awesome. Well, for the audience, thank y'all for joining us today. Hopefully you too learned something about energy conservation, bad ESG policy, and how do we get to more abundance in energy and elsewhere here in America, and hopefully across the globe. Remember, people are people everywhere, not just here, but across the globe. And I want all of them to prosper and have abundance. And I hope you do too. So remember, you can find more information at vanceginn.com or get my Substack newsletter at vanceginn.substack.com, where I'll put show notes from this and a lot of links to all of Gabby's great works. And I hope you'll join me again next time and share this with your friends and family. And until next time, God bless you and let people prosper.